Everyone. Truly apologize for being late here. Um, Unsurprisingly, there was an observer freak out. I have no idea. So I set up the lives, but I don't think I did them correctly, or I needed some sort of streaming software. Anyway, I'm here now. So I'm basically creating my monthly check-in with you guys as to the progress that I've been making for several of the docs I've been working on in the background. This one's going to be about the linear versus circular progress I've been making on my checklist and the evidence. So that's going to be the focus of this. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to create one at 6:30 called, for my roadmap of self-transformation, which is my personal basically instruction manual on how to get through this life, basically. So let's go ahead and get started here. As I'm pulling up my documents, basically I want to give you a status update on what I've done. Like, the overall summary is, between this past month, between the last time I talked to you guys and this time, I've basically been adding quite a few things in terms of images, right? I've added at least one new image. I've added more content in relation to tidal waves, actually quite a bit of information, which I might need to streamline for the next version. But then finally, I really focused on making the definitions more simple. I didn't necessarily go about trying to prove linear versus circular too much this month. It was more along the lines of how can I use these definitions in a relatively simple way. So let me start with the checklist, right? So, much like last time, I kept these four axioms and I bolded the most important axiom. Basically, these are the beliefs in OP, what I consider to be the core beliefs in OP, where if you don't believe these, then you might as well not really participate in OP. Not out of, I'm not trying to say that to be mean, but if you don't agree with these, like, the rest of the system isn't going to really either make sense to you, or it's not going to be valuable to you. So much like everything else, all of OP, I believe, is centered on the fact that they believe that human beings are drug addicted, or very addicted to their version of subjectivity, right? Whatever resonates with them, their aha moments and things like that. And then from there, I just go into kind of defining that a little bit more, right? So subjectivity is the opposite of objectivity, or as Dave and Shane like to put it, trusting the math. Subjectivity leads to people believing that they might not be selfish, that they have everyone's best interest in heart, but really, at least in the OP system, they believe that everyone is selfish. In fact, I have a screenshot basically agreeing with that. And then finally, the belief that there are recurring life problems, or what they call tidal waves, that happen because people avoid objective tasks that they subjectively dislike. And whatever you subjectively dislike is basically called a demon in the system. I don't know if I necessarily like that wording, but I'm just trying to define some terms here. So if you don't agree with these basic ones, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's not like this is a proven scientific system by any means yet. But I would argue that until you basically agree with these, the rest of OP, I mean, sure, it's entertaining, but there's not going to be much value for you in the system, okay? Now, going to the definitions, I did quite a bit of streamlining, which I'm pretty happy about in the past month. I kept this one, in, like I said, linear versus circular. I'm still debating even if I want to call it that. I've had people mention, direct versus indirect, or direct selfishness versus cautious selfishness, things like that. But basically, this is the premise that, everyone is ultimately, everyone ultimately has the same human desires or selfish desires, but there are certain coins in the OP system that go directly for that selfishness, and there's some coins that are a little bit more cautious about that selfishness. So, and what I did was I put everything on the left-hand side as what I consider the more linear, or the more selfish or directly selfish versions of any binary coin in the OP system. And then on the right hand side, I put the more circular or more cautious aspects of, approaches to selfishness, let's say. So a good example would be DI versus DE. This is probably the most distinct and the easiest place to see this, right? Because DI is very selfish, right? It's called self above tribe in some Q&As by David Shan. But DI directly goes for significance and identity. And much like Dave and Shan say, they say that everyone's secretly a decider and everyone's secretly an IP in a lot of ways. So everyone wants this, right? Whether you're Savior DI or not. But there are certain people like myself who are Savior DE and they're more cautious about going for that significance. They're more cautious in the sense of they try and connect with and get validation from as many other people as possible so that they can have permission to call themselves significant, or they can have permission to see themselves as an important identity, right? There's more of a, this is more of a, what David Shannon call a dog leg, or more of an indirect approach to this selfishness. And I would argue everything else is operates on that basis. Now, unfortunately, because I didn't know how to do the live stream, I don't have them in the description right now. But once I'm done streaming, I will include this in the description, of course. But as you're looking through this, I basically try to summarize everything into one sentence, right? So OI defined as going over, learning by revisiting known information, or really solving problems by revisiting known information. OE, learning by gathering new information, right? That's pretty much the summary. And what I would, and I guess what I'll say is that, you know how Dave and Chan have a lot of different words that go with OI, like stacking, or chapter talking, or organizing, or things like that. Basically, what I would argue, and maybe I need to write this somewhere, is that I believe that what I wrote down in each of the definitions are the core definition. And what I would consider, channel changing or chapter talking, I would consider those as symptoms or byproducts of this more core definition. So for example, anytime you learn by visiting known information, or anytime you solve problems by revisiting known information, there's going to come a point where you're so bored by going over the known information that you start to create little shortcuts, right? If you go over known information enough, there's going to be shortcuts, there's going to be chapters that you will organically make, right? In order to save you some time in the future. Right. Think about a movie that you've watched dozens of times, right? If at a certain point you're going to know where your favorite scenes are, you're going to probably even have timestamps for where the favorite scenes are. And that's true whether you're OE or not, right? That's true, save your OE or save your OI or not. Anytime you go over known information, eventually you will start creating chapters for yourself to save energy, okay? Similarly, if you start gathering new information a lot, right, eventually you're going to start channel changing because you're trying to gather too much in a conversation, right? And I would argue that everything else along these lines operate using the same principles. So anyway, I'll put these in the description. Feel free to review those. Feel free to read those. I will say that the energy and info coin is the one that I have not fully streamlined just yet, just because I don't fully understand it. That's where I've been putting a lot of my focus on over the past week or two. But everything else should be relatively fine. Now, much like last version, I did keep this spectrum that I consider to be kind of for the linear versus circular thing, where the most linear types are on the left and the most circular types are on the right, meaning that the left are the people who are the most direct about what they want, and the people on the right, like me, are the most indirect about what we want, right? So this is a basis for a spectrum, and hopefully later I will be able to create a more detailed spectrum, but this is kind of a good start. And then finally, this is kind of where this is where the self-growth side in me comes out. And I think this is important, not just for typing, which I think a lot of people would use this for once it's done, but also for self-growth, right? So it's not just enough to know your type. It's not just enough to know someone else's type. It doesn't matter whether you know that they're linear or circular until you can actually help them with life problems. And the biggest life problem comes from your last animal, and comes from your tidal waves, okay? So I included this screenshot. This screenshot is called, I think it's called, the screenshot is from a Q&A called Doing the Work of Your Last Animal. Okay, this is a recent Q&A, I think came out last month. And Dave and Shan basically break it down. They're like, hey, look, no one's problems comes from the negativity of your last function, right? So for example, my last function is SI, okay? And so what they claim is that everyone gets hyper triggered by their last function, whether that last function is the cause of their problems or not, okay? And so regardless of how angry you get at your last function, that's usually not where your problems are coming from. However, what they do claim is that your problems are coming from you not putting time into your last animal, and as well as you not doing the work of double deciding or double observing. So if you're a decider, you are not doing the work of double deciding. And if you're an observer, you are not doing the work of double observing, okay? And so what I did is I tried, what I did was the thing with Dave and Shan is that they never really give a very clear definition of what a tidal wave is ever. Not that I've seen. They've never outright said, here's how you define it. So I basically, what I did was I took a lot of Q&As and, you know, wrote down notes, wrote down quotes, and basically what I tried to do is I tried to extrapolate or create my own definition based on how they seem to define tidal waves in more specific situations, right? So, you know, whether they're talking about an consume last tidal wave, an IP tidal wave, a Daemon SF tidal wave, they don't really define what a tidal wave is, but they kind of imply what a tidal wave is by how they talk about it. And the way that I define it is a large amount of real life problems that hit a person all at once because the person put off or avoided their demons in tiny ways for a large period of time. And more specifically, I'm going to correct this right now, they're avoiding their last animal, right? Much like how Dave and Shan talked about above, right? It's the last animal that's causing the problems, okay? And so I have a few Q&As in there, and then there's a little bit of miscellaneous notes. Don't worry about that. But that's it for the checklist for now. Now I'm going to move on to the evidence log. There's not much to say about it. It's still very, very messy. But the long story short of it is that I made sure the checklist was the same for the most part. I did keep the energy and info coin relatively simple. And then I've been trying to gather more info. I do think between last time and this time, I definitely have a lot more information about intuition being linear. And I do have a lot more information about sleep in linear. And that's why I bolded these two sections, because I think out of all the other sections, these are the strongest in my doc right now. But everything else is really kind of messy. It's just me gathering quotes. They're not really organized in a specific fashion. I've just been chipping away at it for the past few months. So I wouldn't, don't look at this one, expect too much. But in summary, and it's getting a little bit dark here, but it's all right. In summary, you know, I'm pretty happy about the progress that I've made on the definitions of terms. I do need to spend a little bit more time defining what linear and circular are, and maybe even change the wording on that. But I think all of my definitions as for OP stuff, I think are in a really good place actually, and I'm pretty happy about that. So that's about it for the updates for these docs. So be on the lookout for another update in a month from now, in April 16th. And I'll go ahead and put it live. I think I'm just going to stick to the lives from my phone for now, because I just don't know what was going on, you know, to make me so late in streaming this. So other than that, you know, this is going to be a very long process. I'm not a censor. I'm not ST either. So it's going to take me a while to really do my demons and clear this stuff up for you guys here. So if you guys have any questions, feedback, disagreements, please don't hesitate. I'm in no rush to make this perfect anytime soon. So if you have any corrections, or any suggested corrections rather, feel free to send those my way. And I'll take a look at those. So other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. I'm going to take a little break here and then make my transformation video. And, you know, other than that, I will see you guys in the next video you watch. Take care.